The American stage, on Tuesday, September 10th, was set for the performance the world had been waiting for. A clash between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, a spectacle wrapped in polished rhetoric and corporate-backed smiles. But behind these podiums, behind the promises made to the tired and desperate American people, lies the truth so few are willing to confront. No matter who wins, nothing truly changes. Imagine for a moment a different kind of candidate. Let's call them Candidate X, who is not the puppet of Wall Street or Silicon Valley. No, this candidate is a specter, a figure born not of privilege but of struggle, shaped not by the wealth that lines the pockets of corrupt politicians, but by the calloused hands of those who built this nation. But Candidate X would never be allowed near the political stage, because if he were, he would tear the curtain down for all to see. The grand play designed to distract, to pacify, to deceive. Candidate X knows the truth, that the American dream is nothing more than a shimmering mirage, designed to keep you chasing after a future that will never come. But what would such a leader look like? For those who still believe in the illusion, Candidate X would say, "Look closer. Do you really think this stage was built for you? Do you think these players have your interests at heart? The truth is, you've already been written out of the story." Candidate X is here to challenge the very foundations of what you've been conditioned to accept as democracy, to strip away the layers of deception and show the world as it truly is, raw, unfiltered, and ready to be rebuilt. Who is Candidate X? What does he stand for? And more importantly, how does he plan to unite the 99%, the overlooked and exploited, in a world that thrives on division? Prepare yourself for the words you've never heard from a politician. These words they've been too afraid to say. Candidate X is not just a candidate, he's a reckoning, a force that cannot be silenced, and now he's ready to speak.
Good evening. Tonight we are speaking with United States Presidential Candidate X. First question to Mr. X. Trump tried to kill the Biden administration's border security bill. That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border. What are your thoughts on this?
The motivations behind such actions aren't as simple as they seem, are they? You see, Trump hides behind his grand performance, behind the currents of fear, manipulating us all at every turn in an attempt to promote his own interests and those of his cronies. What better instrument to manipulate the American people with than the threat of chaos, of an unchecked border? Does the border crisis concern him? No. His loyalties do not lie with the plight of migrants or the people supposedly threatened by their presence. His real worry is the collapse of his narrative and that the people will finally see through his charade. If the Biden administration succeeds in taming this border crisis, then Trump's carefully curated mask, the mask of the savior of America, the only one who can protect the nation from a looming tide, begins to crack. And when the mask shatters, the people may, at last, glimpse the truth, that he is no different from the corrupt politicians he once claimed to oppose. A vulture, no less than the others, prowling in the shadows, waiting for the next carcass to present itself for them to gorge on, and, after having their fill, moving on to their next hustle. By ensuring chaos persists, by blocking every avenue of progress, Trump secures his power. He keeps the fear alive, and with it, the support of those who have not yet seen through his tactics. What remains of Donald Trump's influence if we all move beyond fear and work together to execute on legitimate solutions? This farce that has captured the zeitgeist would begin to collapse. The reality? Trump's power is maintained not by solutions, but by the absence of them, by the illusion of a master plan which single-handedly would make America great again. Donald Trump seeks to keep the people divided and powerless, then claims to represent their savior when he, in fact, is the architect of their suffering, actively blocking progress on the very issues he runs his campaign on. And here lies the truth. The moment we refuse to be led by fear, the moment we cast aside the shadows he conjures, Trump loses everything. This November, it's time to step out of the darkness, to reject the fear that has held us captive, and to embrace a future built on hope.
When Kamala Harris first ran for president, she said she wanted to ban fracking. Now she doesn't. She wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now her campaign says she doesn't. She supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now she's taking a harder line. She says that her values have not changed. So then, why have so many of her policy positions changed?
Vice President Harris, much like all those within the hallowed halls of power, reveals an age-old dance, a familiar game of masks and mirrors. Her supposed dedication to principles is like a fleeting wisp, as transient as the shifting winds of political fortune. Our politicians all share the same creed, do they not? Be they Democrat or Republican, they cling not to values, but to the raw pursuit of power. When the moment demands a hard stance, she, like the rest, will strike that pose with conviction. But the tides of politics are fickle, and when those tides turn, so too does her conviction sway, like a flag snapping in the breeze, changing its direction whichever way the wind blows. It's always been this way. These establishment politicians come before us, clothed in promises, their words sweet and full of hope, pledging loyalty to the people's cause. Yet once the ballot is cast and the office is secured, how swiftly the tune changes. Why? Because they have no need of us then. We are but the stepping stones to their grand designs, and once crossed, they reveal their true colors. Colors that, unsurprisingly, align not with the common folk, but with the super-rich, big business, and ownership class. Make no mistake, Harris, like all her ilk, pays lip service to the needs of the people, while serving the feast of power and wealth to oligarchs who hold the purse strings. The time has come to rise above this travesty, demanding of our leaders more than mere empty words. Our campaign is not cut from the same cloth as theirs. We speak of true allegiance to the people's will, a devotion to policies grounded in reason, unclouded by the interests of the rich. And we will not shy away from exposing the names of those who have stood in our way for far too long. Their time has passed, and ours is just beginning.
We have an election in just a few days. I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which of course we all know was a cornerstone of our democracy and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. President Trump, on January 6th, told his supporters to march to the Capitol. He said he would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day. The officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing said he watched it unfold on the television of the Oval Office. He did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before he sent out that video message telling his supporters to go home. Is there anything he should regret about what he did on that day?
It should surprise no one that Donald Trump has once again shirked any semblance of responsibility for the events surrounding the transfer of power in 2020 and January 6th. Time and time again, he has wielded dangerous, inflammatory rhetoric like a blunt weapon, setting the stage for chaos and division among Americans, only to feign innocence when it's time to face the consequences. From his provocation of the January 6th insurrection, to his infamous call for far-right extremists to stand back and stand by, to his steadfast refusal to denounce white nationalism, and his encouragement of violence against those with opposing views, Trump has never once taken the noble path of accountability, a quality one should rightfully expect from any leader. Always driven by self-interest, Donald Trump seeks only the path of least resistance, sidestepping the consequences of his actions with shameless ease. But it would be a grave mistake to attribute this behavior to Trump alone. No, this pattern of deflection and deceit runs far deeper, permeating the highest echelons of our political class. Every 4 years, we are serenaded by presidential candidates with promises of prosperity, justice, and sweeping change. Yet these are but illusions, mere shadows flickering on the walls of a hollow cave. By dangling before us the tantalizing mirage of a better tomorrow, they divert our gaze, only to proceed with policies that fatten the pockets of the ultra-wealthy. And when the music stops and questions arise about why the rich grow ever richer while the burdens on ordinary Americans grow heavier, these leaders cast the blame elsewhere, perpetuating a cycle of misdirection, And so it goes year after year, election after election. Like a well-oiled machine, the cycle of false hope and suffering resets, lulling us back into submission, as though some elaborate mechanism were in place solely to placate and pacify. Where is the accountability? Where is the leadership that this nation so desperately craves? The time for complacency has passed. It is time to lift the veil of this grand charade and demand a higher standard from those who claim to represent us. My pledge to the American people is simple. Should I be elected, I will usher in a new era of transparency and responsibility. On my first day in office, I will sign an executive order mandating that any politician who addresses the American people will do so under oath, with the full weight of perjury hanging over any who dare mislead or deceive. Together, we will chart a new course, one where our elected officials are held to the standards their office demands, and where truth, not illusion, governs the day.
This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election. He said, quote, "When I win, those people who cheated," end quote, and then he lists donors, voters, and election officials. He says, "will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences." One of Harris's campaign's top lawyers responded saying, quote, "We won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote." Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Imagine the delicate machinery of governance, intricately balanced, designed to safeguard the interest of all. But what happens when that delicate balance is seized, when the scales of justice are tipped by unseen hands, operating not in the name of fairness, but in the pursuit of a singular agenda? The judicial system, a cornerstone of democracy, has been insidiously infiltrated, twisted to serve the interests of partisan interest groups, each more cunning than the last. Organizations like Americans for Prosperity, the Heritage Foundation, the NRA, and the Federalist Society are not mere institutions. They are the architects of influence, methodically dismantling the foundation of fairness and law, brick by brick. Look closely, and you'll see their handiwork. They seek dominion not just over the legislative halls, but over every pillar of governance, the legislative, the executive, and most dangerously, the judicial. They don't whisper their desires. They shout them through the decisions of justices like Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Barrett. The Supreme Court, once a bastion of impartiality, is now crowded with figures who serve not justice, but ideology. These names are not just figures in robes. They are the arbiters who tore down Roe v. Wade, unraveling decades of progress to enforce an extreme vision that caters only to a select few. But the manipulation doesn't stop there. Observe the grotesque art of gerrymandering, entire districts carved up like pieces of meat, each slice calculated to disarm the will of the people and serve the interests of the few. It's through these acts of sabotage that private entities override the very foundation of democracy, the general will. This is not an act of governance. It is a hostile takeover of the very essence of the republic. To restore the balance, we must strike at the root. We will purge the influence of money from politics, outlaw lobbying that turns representatives into marionettes. Term limits will be the sword that cuts down entrenched power brokers across all branches of the federal government, from senators to the lifelong justices of the Supreme Court, ensuring that no one can hold power indefinitely. And we will shine light into the darkest corners, demanding transparency for every candidate, revealing who truly pulls their strings. Through these measures, we shall cleanse our institutions of corruption, restore faith in the justice system, and establish the equilibrium upon which this nation was built. In this fight, no one, no man, no institution is above the law. Once balance is restored, people will once again see justice in its true form, a balance of power, not tilted by wealth or influence, but held steady by the hands of the people themselves.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages who are still being held, Americans among them. Recently, Vice President Harris has said, Israel has a right to defend itself, but it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. Now, an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Recently, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. Kamala Harris has failed to clarify how her strategy differs from Biden's, and Donald Trump has declined to answer how he would approach this issue. How would you do it?
Picture two wolves circling the same prey, locked in a dance of posturing and growls, yet neither intending to strike. In the most recent presidential debate, we witnessed this ritual once more. A theater of rhetoric devoid of real solutions to the stupefying crises that loom over us. Both candidates, bound by invisible strings to the forces of the status quo, dare not approach the heart of the issues. Why? Because to address such matters, like the war in Palestine, would mean unraveling the fabric of a system carefully crafted to serve their and their cronies' needs, revealed in every shallow policy they propose. What does this charade look like to the average American? It translates to the ongoing siphoning of wealth upwards, a phenomenon that has seen the billionaire class double their fortunes, while the rest of us are left scrambling for scraps. It manifests in corporations hiking prices far beyond inflation rates, reaping record profits while we teeter as destitutes on the edge of survival. Politicians like jesters in the court of the super rich bicker over trivial matters, deliberately sowing division among Americans, all while advancing the interests of the rich and powerful without fail. The time for pretense is over. What is required now is not the hollow gestures of reform, but a profound systemic change, one that places the will and welfare of the people before the insatiable appetites of the ultra-wealthy. When it comes to the war in Palestine, the American people have spoken with clarity and conviction. They demand an end to these endless wars, a halt to the constant pandering to the military-industrial complex, and a final cessation of the relentless imperialistic foreign policy agenda. Under my administration, your voice will no longer fall on deaf ears. We will honor your will and insist on an immediate resolution to this war. I shall face Netanyahu and make our terms clear. Our financial and military support, once freely given without question, will now hinge on the following. 1. The immediate implementation of a ceasefire. 2. A return of meaningful negotiations focused on the safe return of remaining hostages. 3. Genuine steps toward enabling the people of Gaza to freely elect a new government. 4. The termination of the military occupation of the Gaza Strip and an end to settlement expansions in the region. 5. Strict adherence to international law. Should Israel comply with these stipulations, the United States will continue to maintain a close and supportive relationship. But the era of unconditional support has come to its rightful end.
I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. It has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. Donald Trump has said he would solve this war in 24 hours by making 2 phone calls, declining to comment on the issue of who he wants to win this war. Kamala Harris has not been clear how exactly she would handle this issue differently than Joe Biden. As Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with the war in Ukraine?
Imagine a realm where the true strength of a nation does not reside in their complete domination over other nations, but in the strength, ingenuity, and welfare of its own people. As Commander-in-Chief, I will seek an immediate halt to the war in Ukraine. Since the conflict's onset in 2022, over $175 billion have flowed from our coffers into the fires of a war far from our shores, more than $106 billion of that sum directed to Ukraine alone. Consider this. Over $1,300 from every American household has been drained to fund this war. How many of us right now could feel the weight lift from our shoulders with such an amount returned to our accounts, relieving the burdens of this relentless cost of living crisis? The military-industrial complex, with its insatiable appetite, drives us even further into these foreign entanglements. But I will not be its pawn. As your commander-in-chief, I shall do what is right for the people who elected me, not for the machines of war. The Pentagon, in its unchecked hubris, has failed 6 consecutive audits, yet its pockets are lined with unchecked billions. Under my leadership, their budget shall be slashed to reflect only what they have proven capable of managing, and the rest will be reinvested into our own nation, into the roads that crumble beneath us, into the schools that fail our children, into the healthcare system that leaves too many behind. This is the true battle, securing the future of America for Americans.
I want to turn to Afghanistan. We witnessed a poignant moment recently on Capitol Hill honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. On this issue, Kamala Harris has focused on the war ending being positive and neglecting to address her responsibility in the negative aspects of the withdrawal. Donald Trump has previously negotiated with the Taliban and called withdrawal an embarrassment. What are your thoughts on the withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Picture this, a nation brought to its knees, not by foreign adversaries, but by its own folly. The Biden-Harris administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan was not merely a failure. It was a public spectacle of incompetence, a tragic comedy where over $7 billion in military equipment was gifted into the hands of the Taliban. We abandoned 175 of our own citizens, left allies to the mercy of those we once called enemies, and turned our backs on countless supporters of the American cause. The world looked on and saw not the strength of America, but its profound ineptitude. Yet here lies the great irony. The retreat itself, it was not the failure. No, the failure was in our refusal to walk away sooner. 2 decades of blood spilled, 2,461 American soldiers, lives erased, and hundreds of thousands of Afghan souls, women, children, innocents, sacrificed to the altar of misguided policy. And for what? What fruit did we reap from this blood-soaked ground? None. The Taliban remains seated on its throne, unmoved just as it was a quarter century ago. Now consider this, the foreign policy of this so-called great nation. We poured $2.3 trillion into a land we could not control, while the cracks in our own foundations grow wider each day. What could we have built here had we not allowed ourselves to be shackled to endless wars, feeding the insatiable hunger of the military-industrial complex? Yet no such reckoning has come. No one has faced the consequences for this catastrophe. No hand has risen to take responsibility. Instead, what did they do the moment we withdrew? As the dust settled in Afghanistan, they thrust us into the jaws of 2 new conflicts, eager to feed the insatiable hunger of the military-industrial machine. They whispered to us, "At least no Americans are dying overseas now," as if this is some balm for our wounds. But I ask you, what of those who die here, within our own borders, forsaken by a government that has long since stopped serving them? The time for such madness is over. The forever wars must cease. No longer will we sacrifice our future on the altar of greed. We shall dismantle the machine that profits from the blood of others, and for once turn our gaze inward, to invest not in distant lands but in our own soil, our own people. Under my leadership, this shall not be a dream, but a promise fulfilled.
I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. President Trump recently said of Vice President Harris, "I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black." I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
It is not. The only thing that should command our attention when choosing our leaders is their merit, their true worth, measured by what they have accomplished for our nation and what they are capable of achieving. This, and only this, should guide our judgment. Yet what does Donald Trump attempt? He seeks to deepen the chasm between us, to stir the waters of division. Like many of our so-called top officials, he remains fixated on what fragments us, rather than focusing on what could unite us. While we are distracted by this internal strife, Trump, Kamala Harris, and their allies quietly advance the interests of the wealthy and powerful, all at the cost of the common people. But the veil is thinning. The time has come to lay bare this rhetoric for what it truly is, a calculated game of divide and rule. The hour is upon us to rise together and demand more from those we elect, to call out those truly responsible. The time for accountability has arrived, for the reckoning of those who have betrayed the people's trust.
Donald Trump, who has long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, only has a concept of a plan after all these years. In 2017, Kamala Harris supported the creation of a government-run healthcare system, but flipped 2 years later in a proposal that included a private insurance option. What do you plan to do on healthcare?
Let us speak plainly. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have failed to present a genuine plan to dismantle and replace Obamacare, not out of incompetence, but because they are ensnared by the gilded hands of Big Pharma. The pharmaceutical giants, with their deep pockets, pour millions into both Republican and Democratic coffers. This is no act of charity, it's a transaction. In return, our so-called leaders offer half-hearted measures, carefully crafted to appear as solutions while leaving the roots of the problem untouched, ensuring the cycle of exploitation endures. Neither Harris nor Trump have the will to challenge Big Pharma's stranglehold over our government and its political institutions. Their reluctance to confront this titan reveals where their loyalties truly lie. Under my leadership, this will change. I will strip away the veil of corporate greed that has long suffocated American healthcare. I will publicize healthcare, reorienting it to prioritize prevention over mere treatment. The days of profit-driven care, where pharmaceuticals exploit the most vulnerable, will be numbered. We will not wait for incremental change or settle for future promises. No longer will these vital medicines be beyond the reach of the people's grasp, and their attainment obstructed either by endless queues and waiting lines or unreasonable price tags which only the well-off can afford to pay. Under my administration, we will demand fair drug prices for all, immediately, not in some distant hypothetical future. The era of these corporations thriving on the suffering of many will meet its end.
The time has come for closing statements. Mr. X.
Are you beginning to see the grand performance, the lies, hypocrisy, and deceit that is laid before you? By choosing to elect either of these corporate puppets who pose as my opponents for the Oval Office, you are only ensuring that none of the deep-rooted, systematic issues which I have so far raised will be so much as grazed. The victor, basking in their vacuous triumph, will proclaim that all is well, that we are marching boldly into the future on the right side of history. Meanwhile, the defeated will howl with fury, bemoaning that had they prevailed, our world would have been made right and whole again. Blame will flow like a river, and those who dared vote the other way will be vilified as the very personification of our woes. Thus continues the tired spectacle that has plagued our country for far too long. The Democratic and Republican parties serve only the wealthy and powerful. Their loyalty lies not with the people, but with the same corporations and aristocrats who have long feasted upon the exploited labor and trampled dreams of the people. These candidates, these hollow figures paraded before us, are but distractions. They keep you fixated on trivial skirmishes and empty rhetoric, on the margins of debate. All the while, the real agenda marches forward without impediment, to serve the interests of the ownership class, silently and unopposed by a divided people. But now, my friends, is the time to awaken from our slumber. It's time to stand as one and demand the end of this unbridled greed of the political and capitalist elites. Their fraud, once cloaked in shadows, is now laid bare for everyone to see. And therein lies our chance, the chance to recognize it, to rise against it, and to demand true change. Are you not tired of the same script, day after day, month after month, and year after year, of the never-ending loop of false promises? As the old adage reminds us, insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Is it not time for something real and concrete? Is it not time to confront the grotesque inequality that festers at the heart of our society? to tear down the corrupt systems that feed only the insatiable appetite and fill the endless pockets of the elites while leaving scraps for the rest? To build a future where the policies of this land serve not the few, but the many. Is it not time for the people to finally have their due? It's time to reevaluate what we hold dear, to discard the falsehoods we've been fed, to embrace a rational, just path forward. The future, my friends, belongs to us, but only if we dare to seize it, cast off the failed ways of the past and join in building a government that is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. The hour of change has arrived. The future is not a distant dream. It's within our grasp. We need only reach out and claim what is rightfully ours. It's time for our future. Now.
And so we conclude, not with the polished platitudes you're used to, but with a truth that cuts to the bone. Candidate X doesn't drape himself in empty promises, but stands as a beacon, a guiding flame for those who toil, for those whose sweat has built this nation while reaping none of its rewards. As we stand on the precipice of what could be, let it be known, Candidate X has shown us not just what is possible, but what is owed. A future where the many, long silenced and sidelined, no longer whisper in the shadows, but instead freely roar out in the open. This is not just a gift that will be handed to you. The fight for justice, for equity, for a world that listens to the voices that built it, must be seized. Candidate X is not a lone hero. He is the reflection of a growing storm, the embodiment of a reckoning long overdue. The change you crave, the future you deserve, lies in your hands. Stand up, speak out, and together, we will not only tear down the old, but build something greater in its place. If you wish to remain in the dark, bound by illusions you've been sold, then turn away now. But if you, like Candidate X, are ready to rise and reclaim what's yours, then know this. Your time is now. Thank you for watching, but more importantly, thank you for seeing. The curtain may have fallen, but the show, our show, has only just begun.
If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more content from us, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. It really helps out the channel. For more information, please visit illumination.nexus or connect with us on reddit.com/thegrailsearch. Thank you for watching.